Okay, we are live. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Hello, John.
Hello.
We have a very special guest today. It's John Abel, the technical director from the office of CTO of Google. 30 years of experience working with the great tech companies and working with the fantastic people like our audience who are academics. Welcome to the Smart Tribe, John.
It's brilliant being here, and thank you for inviting me to speak.
John, you call yourself that you are developer turned innovator, and you work with the great technologies like AI, blockchain, Internet of Things. Technologies are very familiar with our audience, and you are turning those great technologies for great products for your customers. And also you work with a lot of STEAM scientists, helping them to turn their science into great products and technologies. If you can tell us a little bit about your background, about your experience, so we all up to speed and understand our synergies.
Brilliant. So let me tell you a bit about my career, and actually even before that in education. So when I first started out, you will know if you know me, or if you look at my LinkedIn, or even if you read the briefing before this, that I am dyslexic, which means that actually the classical route in education, etc., I couldn't quite follow because I wasn't very good at exams. I struggle to flow in English, so it's really weird because it's my natural language, obviously, but I still struggle to read. And obviously through the dyslexia, a lot of my early education wasn't actually, it didn't work well for me. So I was very lucky. I had a very supportive school that allowed me to go and do a HND, Higher National Diploma, which is very hands-on. And I then was able to start doing IT. And what I found is actually being neurodiverse, actually logical problems and logical issues are very good for me to focus on. I like things that have got a logic background to them, and especially the way you have to answer it. And the other thing about dyslexia is it is not uncommon to be very creative. So everything I've done is being creative through my career. I started in the college that I went to, working in the IT department. Then I was lucky to do some research for a pharmaceutical company. And then I was very happy. I was let's say, brought into the Oracle family. So I had a good 26 years at Oracle, and it was fantastic, a wonderful company to work for. But I decided, like many other things in my career, I wanted to have a change. And then last year, I decided to move to Google, specifically Google Cloud. And, I've had a fantastic time here at Google. And I think, the thing I reflect on, I have an appetite to learn. I have an appetite to experiment. And for everything that I do, experimenting and learning is probably the number one job. I do believe you can continuously learn new tricks, and it's that open mind, agility and flexibility is critical for you to do that. But I look back over the last 30 years and the industry's changed massively for us, and the world has changed massively. When I started, it was on a terminal talking to a mainframe, and then within a few years we were using laptops, and then we had the .com, which meant that we saw the internet bubble create and blow and then get created again. And then in the later part of my career, I've seen cloud and cloud technology immerse. And the one thing I've realized, the one skill that you have to have today is the ability to be flexible, and also the mindset to be agile and not be just focused in what you're famous for yesterday, because going in the future, you're going to be famous for something very different. And the pivots are happening now much faster. But it's a very exciting time.
It's a really good thing to hear, because we very often, when we speak to our smart tribers, PhDs, very often learning about deep tech. They are focusing for many years on a certain topics, and then moving to industry, they find it really challenging because they have to be flexible and agile. But you're saying even being in industry, we have to keep changing all the time anyway, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, I haven't gone through the lifestyle of people on this call, so I'm not a PhD student. I would have loved to do that, and at some point I will do it. I'll make my life ambition. to achieve what many people on this call have already achieved. For one reason why, when I wrote my first book, I remember the excitement of being a world authority on something. You know, I wrote a security book, and it was 700 pages of my life that in a year, deep technical book. I literally, for the next 3 or 4 years, was the world authority on this security subject. And the pleasure that gave me, knowing that I was the very first to create something like this, and I knew more about it than anybody else that I knew, which meant that skill of deep understanding of something was very precious to me at that time. And I sort of had the small part of a life of what a PhD student would go through for a very small part of my career. And, you know, I urge people, don't lose that skill, because the ability for someone to go deep is incredibly difficult, because the focus and the drive you have to do to learn and experiment and know that there will be days where it's hard as well as good, you know, is fascinating. But I also urge people that your skill as a fantastic individual doing a fantastic job can pivot to anything, and it doesn't have to be on one subject. And actually, one of the lessons I've learned recently while at Google is not having a biased data set. You know, my eyes have been opened up to a different world when I left Oracle, because I got a different data set to work on. And that ability to see a different person's view, or even a different problem statement, and then use a different data set to answer that problem, actually, it's like having a very large house where you're only staying in one room, and someone says to you, by the way, there's another 50 rooms. Have you had a look? And it's the excitement of going through those other rooms that you start experiencing the full potential. And I always say to people, you know, there's always a right and a wrong, and there's always a view, and you can prove through great research outcomes, and that's what scientists do. And I always feel that the wider the data set or experiences you have, the more ability you have to really validate your outcome and make it applicable to what you're trying to answer. So I now always use a wide lens of how I look upon the world, and it's helped me.
I think this is the best pitch I have heard so far from any industry person. Talk to academics why they should move to industry. You sold us. That's it.
Brilliant.
When we chatted before a few weeks ago, I remember when I asked you, could you talk to our audience? You said, yeah, absolutely. I know you are very passionate about education, about mentorship. You are a speaker at different universities. But you said right away, but I want to talk about social skills. I don't want to talk about technologies. I want to talk about social skills. You are very, very fixed on that. Why do you think it's so important to talk about social skills to PhD?
So first of all, you will notice that I'm not always eye contact with the camera. And there is a reason for that. And I've had to learn to keep eye contact with the camera. It's easier when I'm on stage. With the bigger the audience, it's easier for me to hide it. I'm actually an introvert. Okay, so after things like this, I have to take a long time to recover. And the reason it's important is I also don't have good social skills by default. And I've had to educate myself. So I like my own company. You know, I have friends, but it's a small set of friends. And I realized that actually everybody's got a different way of working. And as you get closer to when I left the college and I started working in an engineering group, I could still live in my world because it was quite neurodiverse, and generally technical roles, or just because of the nature of the role, it's not uncommon to have it quite neurodiverse. So the people I was really interacting with were like me. And then I was asked to do some speaker events, and I remember one of my audience coming up to me and said, "You really like your shoes." And I said, "What do you mean I really like my shoes?" "You're always looking at your shoes." And I realized when I presented, and it's an awful thing to do, I went back and watched a video recording of one of my interviews or one of my presentations, and I realized I just looked down the whole time. I wasn't engaging with the audience. I didn't take on the feeling. So I was very lucky that I had the ability to work with Shakespearean actors because I enjoyed speaking, but I found it wasn't natural. And I realized actually there's an art to speaking, and there's an art to actually becoming someone different on stage. And in life, we're always at one point on stage, and we're on showing the best we have. And the thing that always frustrated me when I worked with people that are incredibly bright, that the capability to handle deep challenges was just so impressive. You know, I worked with PhD students at Oracle and at Google, and I just get blown away with the mind they have. And my own personal frustration, I wanted to share what I knew with the world in a nice, impactful way, with something that wasn't so scary. And I urge people to think about these ability to share your knowledge in a way that actually allows people to consume it. Because when I wrote my book on security, I generally lost people incredibly quickly. I went into presentations, I would sit there on stage, I would talk about it. I could see the audience when I started looking up from my shoes. I could see the audience were just lost. I had lost them on slide 5. And I realized because they weren't a world authority on this subject. And what I had to do is learn from that to dial it back. And I had to much more engage with the audience. And the audience, by the way, can start with 3 people. You know, an audience is not 100 people. And I spent a lot of time over the space of 2 years to really slow down and reflect on what I was trying to achieve. Because what we really want to do is, when we're talking about engaging with people in any setting, we're trying to make it for exciting for them as well as for me. And if they could feel some of my passion for the subject, and they could even understand the fundamental elements I'm talking about, and if I could read real time how deep I can go without losing them, the sense I got from that, and also the pride I got from that, was greater than the content I was naturally presenting. Because your gift that people on this call have, you've done some of the most fantastic work ever, and the world needs to hear it. Your job now is to make it exciting to everybody, and that's from the layman to the genius. And because we need people to really come alive with their ideas, because the one gift a human has, and the fantastic people on this call have, you're incredibly creative to do what you've done already. The bit about industrializing it now is just learning the skill of how to present it and how to industrialize it. And I'm sure there's already brilliant presenters on this call, and I'm convinced about that. But it's always worth to reflect and just improve and make marginal gains to what you've already done. So that's the sort of thing, and that's why I'm so passionate about talking to students, because I love seeing the energy of creativity that they create and how they can then use that to change the world we're in.
What are other skills you would say are very important for academics while transitioning to industry, and then once they transition and they should continue working on, apart from the communication skills? And
so let's talk about the first lesson I had to learn when I moved out of academia to industry, and even after I wrote a few books, is it's very easy, as I talked about before, to get a biased data set. So it's my way. And actually, the skill you've got to start developing, and I was very lucky, I had a good mentor, was being crystal clear on what does success look like for that organization. So success for that organization could be market shaping, could be revenue, could be competing against a company. It could be creating something that's groundbreaking. And for individuals to really know what that is, what's their objectives in the context of the employer they work for. And it's important that people really understand it and make sure the way they articulate their solutions, their innovations, their research, their product creativity in that mindset. Because majority of people will be thinking of in industry the what's the objectives of the company, whatever they are, and aligning that. So the skill to not only take your great mind and apply it to a problem statement, but how you align the answer to the problem statement to the company's objectives is the number one skill, because it's where you get scale. It's very easy to be innovative, and it's very easy to create solutions. What's really hard is making sure your timing is good and making sure it's relevant to the wider scale of the company. Because the biggest kick that I get is when I come up with an idea and I hit the timing spot on with something that's going on in the industry. And if I can do that in such a way that I can scale it quicker. A friend of mine said to me, follow travelers that want to come on the same journey as you. And the reason I really like that is the more you can get other people passionate about it in their own lenses, in a business and in industry, the more people want to push you harder to succeed more, and the more you get. So it's important to bring on your followers and your travelers to make sure it's part of a team. And in industry now, it's super important to work as part of a team and an ecosystem, which for me, as being an introvert, I find very difficult because I like working on my own. So I have to remember there's a team in industry, there's a team in business. And like any good research, there will be a team in research as well. But think of it in the context, they're all going to have different roles. So it's really find your fellow travelers with you, make sure that you get passionate towards the company objectives and grow together.
That's probably why even more the social skills are so important, because you have to communicate to very different type of people what you are working on, what are your ideas.
Yeah, you're spot on. I remember a very good friend of mine, who's a good friend of mine now. At the time, the first time I met them, it was the first time I met someone who was a board level exec, and I presented to them. And I remember what they said. We were 10 minutes into the presentation. They said, "John, it's just words. It's just words. I have no understanding what you're talking about." He said to me, he goes, "Does anybody else around the table have a clue? I'm sure it's brilliant. Go back to the start, dumb it down, treat us like it." He said to me, "For me personally, I'm not asking about anybody else, just me personally. If you think what you're talking about is really simple, think again and set another simple bar." So I went back and I started my presentation again, because it's quite embarrassing because you're stopped halfway through, a fairly big meeting, and I had my peers around me just going. But then I realized I had to do it because I'd lost them. And when you're trying to get people to come on your journey, it's super easy for you to see the answer because in your head, you've worked through to it. It's really hard to use the stepping stones to get everybody else to see your answer or even see your vision. And I had to really reflect on that moment and go back. So now I always look for simplification in how I present to people, because it's super easy to lose people.
Yeah, that's what is the social skills. Once again, super, super important. How about the other way around? What industry can learn from academics? I mean, the company currently working for, Google, it started with borrowing an ideas from academia, because the way how actually Google works today, it's about classification of most search things, and this is exactly how it's in the research world. It's about the citations, how much research papers are being used. But my question is, in general, in the industry world, what in the industry the companies can learn from academics apart from the technical skills and so on?
Brilliant. every major organization in the world is likely to be disrupted from outside their industry. And that means what academia is great at. Well, actually, let's drop the word academia. Let's think about the mindset of the people on this call. You can identify complex problems and do the research to understand solutions to those complex problems. Some of the biggest complex problems is how do we handle the disruptor we don't know? And using that research mind to enable companies to innovate and explore in the same way that people on this call would explore and innovate can be game changing to the way that businesses operate. And it's super important that what you do is don't lose that learning mind. Don't ever lose the learning mind. You know, take that learning mind, take those skills and apply them, and just apply them to the organization you're working for. And when you're going out there and moving careers or going into your career in industry, use your same research mind to do the research on a company. And I always, when I used to do interviews for postgraduate, PhD students, etc., I always get a question of, what are you looking for? I used to get this question, what are you looking for? I'm looking for a sparkle. I'm looking for something that goes, wow. And that wow is not necessarily how clever you are in articulating a problem statement. It's the approach you took to answering the question. It's the way you made me think. And it's the way you made me stop and reflect. It's that skill and that way that you can really connect with me is the super exciting bit, because everybody on this call has done the hard stuff really well. It's now actually just thinking about how you can apply that and how you can learn some different skills and enhance your ability to actually take that into a place where they probably would dream of what you can dream up, and how you then pivot towards their world and bring them on the journey will be intrinsically some of the most important times of people's careers. I love going into, and I always use sort of house elements, it seems. I love going into a kitchen and everybody's in the dark on a solution, and you simply turn on the light and show the ingredients and give them the recipe, and they become amazing cooks. And that excitement of getting people seeing, getting them excited about things that you're passionate about is super brilliant. So for us in the world, what companies need is people to be passionate about what they're excited about, but put it in the context of the business.
Not everybody will be so fortunate and apply their expertise while working for industry. I mean, many, yes, would have jobs which they can apply it, but some will have to, like you said, pivot and do something different. Not also, hopefully, can be passionate about it and creative about it. One of the questions we come across, because many academics have to leave academia because simply there is not enough jobs at universities. However, they want to continue be researchers. Is there a chance why those people who are not so lucky and are not able to continue apply the expertise and have to do something different? More and more we see technology companies are doing, allowing people to do their research on the side. Is it something you see the trend in companies right now, especially big tech companies?
The reason I'm pausing on that answer is there's so many different roles in technology companies. There's so many roles in industry anyway. The one thing I learned was I pivot more often now than I used to pivot when I first started. The tradition back was you could do this job for life. You know, you could literally, I could sit at it, and I realized very quickly that technology was higher cadence, so I had to constantly pivot. what I did is I created a list of my skills that I had, and then I wanted to add new skills to my list. So every time I pivoted, I was adding new skills, new data sets, new understanding. So technically, I was always doing research. I never left research. I just was doing research because I never really found what I was really good at, because I had more excitement at learning new skills. So my research never stopped. And every day, even if it's small little bits of micro research where I might be getting ready for today or a presentation, or I'll go and do some research and I'll learn something new. So even if you're not doing what you did as your niche skill, the ability to take your mind and say, I'm going to constantly research. I'm going to constantly challenge myself to learn new skills, learn new like data sets, will mean that you become flexible and more agile, as I mentioned in the first 5 minutes of this discussion. And that alone is the gift of research. So, you know, I think we have a very, I used to have a very polar view of what research meant. And now I realize actually to be good at what I do today, I have to constantly research. I just don't do it in the way I would have done it when I was working at a college.
I bet we all love it, this answer. That's kind of answer we wanted to hear it. We can continue research. John, thank you so much. Those were a few questions from me, but we're going to start taking questions from the audience.
Brilliant.
And one question, the first question came in, is if I can read out to you. If in academia we focus on a very narrow niche of problem, how we get in broad mindset to convert in industry?
First of all, you have skills that are already broad. So what I always say to people is, you know, I was talking to actually a PhD student this morning. I put out on LinkedIn, and they were struggling to get a job. And they said to me, I'm struggling to get a job because I've done this very specific piece of research, and I've realized there's about 2 companies on the planet that are interested in this research, and neither are hiring. So I said, okay, talk to me about just you as a human. Just talk to me for 10 minutes on the skills that you have as a human, just as a, you know, for your niche subject. They came up with 10, 12 different things. And it was like, I have the ability to handle complex scenarios. I have the ability to broaden my research to understand how I fix those complex scenarios. I have the ability to go into a level of detail and stay focused. I have the ability to understand all elements of this to make sure that my conclusion is valid. Okay. And more and more and more and more. And I said, okay, what's niche about any of that? And they said, well, nothing. Okay. So yes, what you might be researching, what you might be working on is very niche. But through that process, you've gained many skills to be much more broader. And actually, it's divorcing the two statements apart. When I wrote my book on deep security, I mean, this wasn't even just security. This was Oracle application security. This is a fine line down a very small tunnel. For me to write that, I had to develop code. I had to write problem statements. I had to think like a customer. I had to actually prove my ability. So I had to do testing. All of these skills are broad. They're not specific. Yes, what I came out in the end was very specific. But what I had to develop was lots of skills that were broad. So what I urge people to do is keep an open mind and keep a list of their broad skills. And when they're doing their piece of research or their very narrow focused industry specific or academia specific, that's just the proving of the broad skills are in practice. And it's changing that mindset that's super important. So hopefully that's answered that question.
I had collected, thank you so much, John, for that. I had collect before some other questions. Also, one of the questions we've been asked is corporate versus startup. We can stay innovative and creative in big organizations like Oracle or Google, where there are thousands of people working. There's a lot of structure, processes, and bureaucracy. Obviously, some corporates are better and worse, but is it possible corporate versus startups, which are obviously startups are very agile. You can do things overnight. You can pursue your own ideas the next day. How does it work really in the big organizations?
Okay, so I've only ever worked for big organizations. I've got to be honest, I was creative the whole of my career. And I actually think if you want to progress, having the mind of being a creator is critical, because what large organizations give you is scale. They give you the scaling, the industrialization of something, but they're all desperate for having a creative workforce. Remember, the human has one gift, which is that light bulb moment, is that creative understanding. And actually, what you can do in a big organization or even a small organization, and technology's enabled this much more, is you can take your idea and scale it. But don't ever think that you can't be innovative in a large or a small organization. You can be innovative in both. And it's just making sure the relevance and the answer you're trying to prove or the innovation you're trying to do relates to at least the business that they're in. So if you come out with an idea that's completely different industry, different business, it's a lot harder to get traction. But it's within your industry. Well, explore and learn. It always has a positive impact.
Thank you for this. We have a few more questions coming in. One is a really interesting one, actually the last one, from Oscar. How do you make interested in yourself, during networking, when you have in startup, in SmartTrap, we are providing the introduction and we are encouraging PhDs to network with industry people. And we're trying to make the introductions very relevant and so on. However, how do I have 1 hour just with you, absolutely random person? How is the best use of this 1 hour with you?
Okay, the success of that hour will be in the first few seconds of you speaking. And there's two ways of doing it. You can walk into a situation where you know the individual and you immediately relate to something they're passionate about. So if I'm doing, let's say, a more structured event where I'm actually going into a situation with someone that I've not met before, I'll do research on them. I will find out what they're passionate about, because generally to get onto the right subject or the right frame of mind, you need to connect with them. It's not necessarily their job to connect with you. So it's super important that the opening moment is you're creating a neutral zone to connect with them. Mm-hmm. If it's though in a situation where you're at an event, so let's say we're at an event, it's coffee break, someone reads your ID tag and they say you come from XYZ, and you're sitting there going, I have no idea who this person is. And you're trying to look at their ID card and it's all a bit uncomfortable. And I hated it. When I first started, I hated it. I now start with a very simple question. So if it's at a conference, what have you enjoyed the most today? It's a simple, super simple question. Or what are you trying to get out of this? It's a super simple question. But the two questions allow you to get the insight to what the person's passionate about. So just answering these two simple questions, what have you got out of this today? Or what are you wanting to get out of this today? And then get excited about their answer and keep connected. If you look like you're disconnecting because you're not actually interested in what they've just said, then your next 59 minutes will become very painful. And it's best to be a human at that point. be excited about what they're excited about, because because when you want to bring them to your world, they'll be excited with you.
Very, very, very true. We have a good question also from David. Do you have specific advice on how to practically go about developing social skills, especially for the neurodiverse?
It's a great question, David. It's a fantastic question. First of all, practice. You can't beat practice. Practice with your family, your friends. Don't become cheesy. Don't walk in as this totally new person. Be a human. But in the first instance, today is not the case. When I was going through acting, being taught by professional actors, they said to me, you've got to learn to read the audience. And I said, what do you mean read the audience? And they said, well, watch everything about them. Watch the way they're moving, the way they feel tired, the way they feel energized, and rise to the occasion. So what I mean by that is don't become an extrovert, like try to show who you're not. Try and make them feel engaged. So take the time to inquisitively know how they're feeling. Watch body language gives you so much. And it's very easy for a neurodiverse person not to read body language. I was terrible at it because I used to look at my shoes. So if I saw their shoes move wrongly, then I probably had a little insight. But for me to keep eye contact was so hard. And even today, when I'm thinking about answers for these brilliant questions, it's hard because I can't keep connected with you, Beatrice, because it's just not me and I have to learn. But when I'm on stage, I have a dear friend of mine said, you're like Beyonce when you go on stage. You're like a very different person, that you actually really have to warm up to it. And you'll generally see me at the back of the audience, warming up to going on stage. I remember once I had to present to 8,000 people, and that's a lot of people live. And I was behind the scenes. And when you're presented that many people, you only see the first 2 or 3 rows.
Right.
And what you realize straight away is the way you use body language. You know, I'm a very hands person, even on video, I'm a hands person, is giving the audience or giving social skills of saying that actually I'm embracing us. And the bigger the audience, the bigger the hands and the bigger the embrace. The smaller the audience, the more introverted is okay. But you've really got to home in on these skills of it's the experience you're giving others is more important than the experience you're getting, because if you do it well, you will feed off their energy and then your experience is amazing. When you pivot an audience to laughing, or if you're getting them engaged, or like now where you're getting some brilliant questions, you find that you get excited like I am now, because it's like, hey, people, first of all, people are asking questions. That's brilliant. But, you know, you'll get engaged, and it's that engagement you can draw upon.
That's true. True. I can feel the energy. To everyone. There's a very good question coming from Abel, which we're constantly being asked as well. Are our research skills only useful within the R&D department?
No, 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 no. I had this one all the time. I had a brilliant postgraduate that I worked with. She was amazing in her capability in solving problems. And she asked me the same question. She said to me, I think I might go back to academia. I might go back and do my PhD. I said, look, if you want to do that, hats off to you, because I'm very proud of you wanting to learn. But I sensed in the conversation, she did, but she didn't. And I asked her, I said, well, what's your problem? She goes, I like researching. I said, do you not think we've got a lot of stuff here that needs researching? And if you think about it, it's applying that skill of researching to answer problems that are different from the ones you think about in your previous life. And what I mean by that is, I love people where I had And what she did brilliantly, she was a media history student. So she was working in an IT company with media and history. What I found with her ability to do research of the level of depth to understand the customers we were working with, and to get that insight and that ability to then articulate to me in a really good, thoughtful way, transform the way I could engage with customers, or that my team could engage. And now she's had a fantastic career, many years on, where she's one of the best strategists I've ever met, because she uses her research to grow strategy through the principles of solving problems. And so don't ever think your skill of research is just for academia. We're desperate in industry to know people want to experiment and learn. And we want to know people are doing the research to prove the pivot or direction a company needs to go for. And it could be as simple as in being in a sales team where they're struggling to find the next deal. The research you could do to find what worked in the past to scale it for the future is so needed. And not enough people do that reflection. So for me, research is beyond academia. It needs to be everywhere, because it's the only way we can prove what we're doing in the future.
Yeah, it's beyond also the R&D department. We academics have fantastic transferable skills, which allow
Amazing.
So many great jobs. We have identified, I think, so far 35 type of positions, and R&D is just one of them academics can do. We have one interesting question, actually not coming from a techie person, but someone who has a problem with techie people. So it's I'm actually a content person who have to work with tech people, so I have a different set of issues. The tech people I met tend to focus only on their goals and stay on that one track. I have tried various ways of communicating with them, explaining the rationale, but it doesn't work. How do tech people want to be communicated to?
Wow. Being a tech person, thank you for the question. It was a great question. When I was a developer, I used to get a problem statement to fix through code. And I would write code, deliver the problem, and move on. When I was working on very big problems, big projects, I may only see the start of what I created and the end of what I created. And it could be the size of a micro atom in the size of the project. And I was super focused. And I remember a systems designer, a very dear friend of mine, who looked after the whole system. So she had the very wide lens. I was down in the code. And she taught me a great lesson that I'll never forget. The ability of a creator or a content person with a technical is to, first of all, make sure that person understands the importance of what they're doing in the grand scheme of things. So when you're trying to get a technical person to because most technical people I work with are quite logical. So it's a logical mindset. So being very creative with a logical mindset, when they're in the art of being a technical person, it's quite hard to engage. But what you can do is just say, literally, she used to do it. Carol used to do it with me all the time. She used to say to me, she goes, John, that piece of code you've done is so important to this business process. I go, is it? And I turn around, is it? Why? Let me just draw something for you. I'm locked in now. I'm engaged. They draw the whole thing. And I go, wow, that bit there does all of that down there. Now, I didn't really want to know it, but then I was intrigued because I was a technical. So I was going through the logical sequences. And again, it's the skill of bringing them up a level and letting people know the consequences of what they're doing. And because majority of people are proud of what they do, especially in a technical mindset, they're proud to develop good code or do good architectures or do good systems. So all I urge you to do is engage with them, to reflect with them how important their role is, but also reflect with them how their piece sits in the whole business problem. And if it's a brand new concept, then go into their world of a logical outcome and be logical in your process with them. And then you'll generally get on pretty well, in my experience, pretty well.
It's to see the whole picture. not just your piece of work, but to explain
Yes.
people, which links very well to what you said earlier about working in industry. You are really performing best if you see the company goals, you see the bigger picture, and you make yourself relevant and useful to succeed.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, all the team goals, all the strategy, whichever is important to the business problem you're answering. Yes.
That's very, very nice links to it. Tricky question from Sergio. Some jobs ads in tech have so many requirements that seems they're looking for unicorns. Do you have an advice for job seeker transitioner on how to handle this?
Really great question. Sergio, this is probably the hardest one that I get a lot in mentoring, which is I've been trying to get a role. They're asking, there was one today that I saw a job advert where the experience required was actually longer than the products existed in the world. And it was like a unicorn. How can you have experience greater than the length of the product? I suppose the first thing is, another story. I was very, very lucky to work with a world authority on negotiation. This person works with prime ministers and presidents on how to negotiate. And they taught me a very simple skill. And I do it all the time now. The first thing to do is write down all the things they're looking for. So the responsibilities and the skills that they're looking for in the job. Then write down all your skills and all of your responsibilities you've had in your life. Really dig deep into reflecting on your capability, and then draw lines from their world to your world. And then you've got a gap. There's a load of stuff you've got that isn't on there, and there's a load of stuff over here that isn't on here. You can either learn it so you can bridge the gap, but it takes time. The other thing is, think about how you can pivot your expertise to showing something they haven't got yet, and actually how you'd present that to them in the interview. So this student this week, exactly the same, been looking for a year for a job. They've done their, I can't remember what level of academia they got to, and they were pretty distraught. And they reached out to me via LinkedIn and said, look, John, I'd just like to have a 10-minute chat. We had a 10-minute chat this morning. I have to generally do them very early in the morning because like everybody gets very busy. And it was a 10-minute chat, and I got them to do it there on the phone, 10 minutes, write down. And they said, but look at this big gap list. I went, hang on, is anything in your experience that would reflect well against those elements? And they said, well, there's a couple of things, but it doesn't exactly relate. Yeah, but in life, nothing exactly relates ever. Talk to me. So they talked to me. I said, well, that's pretty close. Yeah, I suppose so. But isn't that just like fibbing? No, you'd be honest. You're not going to go in there and say, yeah, I've got all these skills. You're going to say, by the way, I looked at this element of the requirement. My skill over here aligns, but not fully. Let me talk to you about my skill. Just going through that piece of research and doing that alignment gives you the ability to find out how close. Oh yeah, 60%, 80%, 40%. And then when you really go deep, you generally notch up another 10 or 20%, generally. But just you doing that and then presenting that in how you apply for that role shows that you're serious about it because you've done your homework. And the way you write the letter to actually articulate that gives you another door of knock edge. Whenever I used to see, when I was in my previous role, I might get 100, 200 applications for a job. I would skim through fairly quickly where I could tell immediately it was a repeat letter from someone that was applying to loads of different interns or graduate programs. And then every so often there'd be one where the person would have nailed me as a human. They would have said something in their letter. I go, wow, they've done their research. Okay, on the pile to be interviewed. And once you get in that room, you've got to use all your skills to get the job. I can't help you in that situation. I can tell you what you could do, but in that situation, you got to nail it. But to get in there in the first instance, you can do it.
And it doesn't have to be 100%, right?
No. No, never, never 100%. Nothing. No one's. If it, you know, it's not. It's never 100%. What it is, it's you can articulate why you can do the job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When I to give you a full answer, when I applied for Oracle, it said I had to have a first degree in computer science and I had to have 3 years experience. I had a HND, High National Diploma. I had 2 years experience and very little of the mandated requirements. I just spent a lot of time knowing how I'd articulate my journey to their office. And I wrote it in the letter. I said, I do not have a degree. I do not have the level of experience. But what I've just done, I think you'll be interested in. And I told them a little story of what I just done. I was in their office and they went, and after an hour and a half, they said, when can you start? You can do it.
Very, very interesting. Well, a good tip. One interesting question from Chris. Academia has a clear incentive to publish novel research. In your experience, is novelty the most important thing in industry, or is it something else?
I'll answer that in a slightly different way. Today, your social media footprint is critical to your future career because everybody will look to see what you've been doing. It's so much more easier now to do research on people. The CV gives you an indication. Other things in the world give you some elements of the person you're about to see. You doing novel research and experimenting and learning shows me you've got a mind to want to change something, or you're wanting to drive in something that hasn't been sorted. That's super valuable. The one thing that I do see is people do this research. So I get a wonderful CV through with amazing novel ideas in it. And then I go on their LinkedIn profile and it says they were working at X and none of these novel ideas are out there. And then I go and find there's in some research database this fantastic idea buried away. And I'm thinking, but why didn't they just put it out there? I mean, if I'd done this novel idea and it was fantastic and it was published, I'd want to shout from the rooftops. I mean, I've not done it, so I don't have the gift that Chris has. So, Chris, you got one up on me. Just tell the world what you're doing. Don't be shy. Go out there and tell them the great work you've done if it's published.
Yes, I suppose reading research papers is not always the easy, but as you say, there are much better and new ways to shout out through social media what people are working on. Abhishek has a couple of questions, which probably will be our last ones. His first question is, should we go to industry after completing our masters or PhDs? Does industry actually really care that we have PhD?
I had this debate with my daughter. So my daughter has done her degree. She's now off to become a doctor. So she was debating, should I go to work, and then if I want to pivot to being a doctor, etc. And I said, look, first of all, do what you want. You get a small amount of time on this planet. Do what you want to do first. You can get roles with a master, with a PhD, because it's you as the human that's got to sell yourself to that organization. Does it give you an extra level into the organization? Depending the role. Some roles might need it, some roles don't need it. I would say that at the stage of your career that you're at, and I don't know, obviously, if you're a mature student, if you've just come out of university, I don't know, and it's not really relevant. If you want to do it, because you get one chance to do something, and never look back and regret. And I think it's much more of a personal choice that you wanted to go through to that level of education that very small amount of people on this planet go through to, and have the pride of what you achieved through that. That's actually so important anyway. And I don't think it is. Don't look at the careers and the jobs you do. I said this on a CNBC interview. last year in the morning breakfast show in front of 4 million people. I said, when I left college, I pretty much could have, I can still do the job now that I trained for when I was at college. Just about. It's just hanging in there. 30 years later, just about. I have some great news and bad news for you. The great news is you got to keep learning, because the bad news is your job that you do today will be very different in a few years' time. And that ability to stand still, I don't think will be the case. And because technology is moving us on so fast. So your research mindset, your ability to pivot onto new problem statements is so important. So to really answer that question, you know, do it what you want to do. It's for yourself, not just for your career. The career bit is, yeah, it's going to happen, you know, but, you know, don't ever think, oh, I shouldn't do my PhD because I want to get into industry. Do what you want to do.
Very good. And probably the skills you acquire during the PhD would be useful.
Yes.
Forever, more than the knowledge sometimes. You're acquired. Okay, very last question. So can you discuss how industry approach PhD researchers for particular problems in academia? For example, Tesla for battery problems.
Yeah, I mean, it's depending on the organization. You can do a quick look. If you see an industry that has a high amount of margin they make, so if they're a high margin yield company, they're generally doing, they might be more focused on a lot of research. So you might find that in certain, you know, like pharmaceutical, IT, etc. But even companies that have a low margin yield, could be construction, etc., trying to innovate. So I would say you can find it, and you can, it's do your research on the company and know who you're talking to. Beatrice, I know that was the last question. Can I take Oscar's question? I really want to answer Oscar's question. You ask Oscar's question, because I've seen that one and I really like to answer that one.
Okay, Oscar question goes, I think networking in the COVID era has become even more awkward for me. Do you have any tips to effectively connect with people through internet?
Ah, great question. So the reason, Oscar, I wanted to answer this one is it is now the time when everybody's digitized for a small amount of time in the world before we pivot back to, I'm not sure we'd ever go back to exactly what we had 6-7 months ago, but at the moment there's a high percentage of people that are currently like this, talking to an 8-inch screen with a camera and trying to be interesting. Like, you know, I struggle with that. And the urge I do use is create a network around you. Make sure, you know, everybody on this call, please link in with me. You can link in with me, just link in, or Twitter, a connection with me, and spend the time to actually, first of all, connect with people, and second, message them with something interesting. To it maybe ask a question, or you liked what you've retweeted something, or you've reshared something that you found interesting, and quote them in it. Because what you find is, if you're constantly engaging with people, and you don't even have to talk with them, at some point, some of them are going to say, actually, I'd like to have a chat with you. And then you just learn the skills of talking to a camera and you get on with it. But for me, you know, my biggest frustration is when people ask for career advice or help, and I just do the research. And I always do the research when I give mentoring of what the person's social media world is, what they're like out there. And I never feel the same passion coming through their digital experience as what I do when I talk to them. And I urge everybody, bring your passion through your digital profile, because the minute you do that, you start becoming unique. There we go.
This is a very good way to end conversation, our fireside chat about networking. So network now more than ever. This is it.
Go crazy.
Well, John, thank you so much. I'm sure you're going to get a few hundreds linking requests right now.
Brilliant.
You've got the energy. Thank you so much. It was really, really nice speaking to you, and I'm sure we will speak to you sometime again soon.
Thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.